After signing utility man Nick Madrigal on Friday, are the New York Mets out on bringing back Jose Iglesias? I'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the Mets did sign an infielder on Friday, just not the infielder that we were all expecting. Boomer, you did us wrong. It wasn't Pete Alonso, but they did get Nick Madrigal on a one-year, $1.35 million deal. That contract includes $500,000 in incentives. Now, what's interesting about this contract is it is a split deal. So while Nick Madrigal could be on the big league roster, it's more likely that he starts the season in AAA Syracuse, and this is really just a depth move. I will talk about how this relates to Jose Iglesias a little bit later down the line, and more just, is Iglesias going to come back to the Mets? We'll really get into that, but the short of it is, I don't believe this really has any bearing on the Mets' decision on Jose Iglesias. What this was an upgrade over Luis De Los Santos. Luis De Los Santos was DFA'd to accommodate this move, and he was picked up by the Mets just back in November. 26-year-old utility infielder, only 13 games of big league experience, did have decent numbers in AAA last year. He was like 16 home runs, 816 OPS, but a guy that was not an established big leaguer. You're getting an established big leaguer here in Madrigal. It is an upgrade for a depth piece on your 40-man roster. That's what the Mets did here. Now, little backstory on Madrigal. He was the number 4 overall pick by the Chicago White Sox back in 2018, made it up to the big leagues in 2020. Across 2020 and 2021, Nick Madrigal hit .317 with a .358 on base and a .406 slug in 83 big league games. So his career got off to a really good start. He was traded for Craig Kimbrell, went from the south side to the north side, became a Cub. Over the last 3 years, Madrigal has been a fixture with the Cubs, but he hasn't really hit. 202 games played, he's hit .251, .304 on base, .312 slug. That's a .616 OPS. With that said, very good defender, and particularly at third base. Despite being a below average hitter in 2023, Nick Madrigal still put up a 1.2 F-WAR, which of course is Fangraphs wins above replacement, largely due to his glove work over at third base. 10 outs above average, 8 defensive runs saved in 72 games and 61 starts. That is elite defense at the hot corner. Madrigal is like a good contact guy. He's not going to strike out. He's not going to whiff. He's going to put bat on ball, but he doesn't impact the baseball. So I think you're definitely talking about a limited offensive ceiling. What this is again, an upgrade over a guy that was at the bottom of your depth chart on the 40-man roster. You are able to get Nick Madrigal because maybe you guaranteed him more money in the big leagues than any other team. And who knows, maybe there was no other split contracts available to Nick Madrigal, where Madrigal was only going to get minor league deals with, the possibility to make the minimum if he made it up to the big leagues at some point. And he's looking at an infield in flux and saying, you know what, why can't I be this year's Jose Iglesias? Why can't I go to Syracuse? And if whoever's starting at third isn't hitting, maybe I get the chance to come up and be a utility guy when a Brett Beatty goes down. I think this is an opportunity for Madrigal to go to a franchise that he wants to be a part of after probably some meetings. And again, a chance to make up some lost money, so to speak, because had he stayed with the Cubs, he was projected to make $1.9 million through arbitration. Ends up getting 1.35 with $500,000 in incentives. So if everything works perfectly for Madrigal, he might end up where he would have been had the Cubs kept him. It's also an interesting little thing to note that Madrigal is represented by Wasserman. We want to kind of follow these things a little bit because it's something to monitor of what agencies do the Mets work with? A lot. And Wasserman's becoming one of those agencies. Clay Holmes, represented by Wasserman. Who else is Wasserman? There's been a couple more. Griffin Canning, also represented by Wasserman. So it's showing there's a good relationship there. And they are, almost knocked my water over. That would have been bad. They are, bringing some clients over to the Mets. So that's just another little thing that I wanted to note here. But this is not a move that would eliminate Jose Iglesias from coming back to the Mets. I believe Jose Iglesias had been eliminated from coming back to the Mets because of the presence of Luis Angel Acuna. Where if you are David Stearns and you're looking at your roster and you have Luis Angel Acuna on the 40, you also have Ronnie Mauricio. You have a couple of guys that can fill the role that Iglesias did last year. Play some second, be the backup shortstop, play some third base. And you want to afford that opportunity to those players because guess what? Jet Williams is coming. Beyond that, Jesus Baez a couple years down the line is coming. And you have to know which of these guys are part of the future, which of these guys should be included in trades. You got to figure out what you have. And while Jose Iglesias had an incredible season with the Mets, ultimately, choosing youth for a bench utility role is probably the right thing. And you could say, well, why not sign Iglesias to the deal you just signed Madrigal to? That's a slap in the face to Jose Iglesias. To offer him another contract like the one he got last year after everything he did for you, you are doing him more of a service to say, hey, go out and get some money off of that great year you had with us. So go out and see if the A's will throw you a contract and you can, be part of that team and maybe get some real playing time. I think that's really what is going on here. And Iglesias, for all we know, he could be holding out to be a member of the New York Mets. I mean, when he did some radio hits earlier this offseason, he was still referring to the Mets as a we. And so I don't think that door is completely slammed shut. But I think as long as you have Acuna on your roster, as long as you don't trade him, which we'll talk about a little bit to close out the show, there's a couple more things that went down today in regards to the pursuit of a pitcher from San Diego that are worth noting. So we'll get to that down the line. But assuming Acuna is with this team, as we've talked about throughout this offseason, I do understand why the Mets might move in a different direction from Jose Iglesias. But with that said as well, you are sort of bringing back the team that you had and sort of running back OMG. Can you really run back the OMG 2024 New York Mets without the guy that was the heartbeat? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you that continue to subscribe. Well, as we look at the Mets roster as presently constructed, there is still the elephant in the room, and that is Pete Alonso's contract, which is still being negotiated. Assuming he comes back, the Mets are in a position right now where their infield would be Alonso, McNeil, Lindor, Vientos, Alvarez behind the dish, outfield of Soto, Siri, and Nimmo, bench of Tyrone Taylor, Luis Torrens, the DH platoon of Jesse Winker and Starling Marte, and you got one spot left. So that spot could go to Jose Iglesias, But again, you have Acuna, you have Beatty, you have Mauricio, you have Jared Young, guy they signed to a major league contract, but he too can be optioned just like Madrigal, and now Madrigal. So you have a lot of depth already. And if you bring Iglesias back and it is a major league deal, you're pretty much shutting out the kids. And I do agree that going into camp, it makes more sense, strictly when you talk about the function of a roster, to stick with an Acuna or a Beatty to grab that last spot. You would hate for Acuna to show up looking incredible, hitting the cover off the ball, looking like he should be the starting second baseman. But you don't have a roster spot for him, so you send him to Syracuse. You don't want that to happen. You don't want Brett Beatty to show up and he's tearing the cover off the ball, and he's actually shown, wow, he looks great over at second base. He picked up first base too. He's given us a lot that we can work with. But yeah, we got Jose Iglesias. Now, if the Mets don't sign Pete Alonso, that's been a pathway for Iglesias to come back, to give you a higher floor option than what you have on the roster. But if we're talking about impact, while Jose Iglesias was incredible for the 2024 New York Mets, in 2025, I think you're kidding yourself if you think that Iglesias would be more valuable than Pete Alonso could to this team. Now, you again could bring back both. You could say, you know what, it's win now mode and guys are going to go down and Acuna will get his opportunity. You could even say, why are the Mets holding on to Starling Marte? Eat all the money, trade him somewhere, and have Iglesias be the platoon partner, so to speak, with Jesse Winker at DH. But really, it would be Mark Vientos, right? So when a lefty's on the mound, Iglesias starts at third, Vientos is your DH. That would be an option. But until they move Marte, move Acuna, or don't sign Pete Alonso and Alonso signs with whatever other team, it doesn't make the most sense for the roster to bring back Iglesias. With that said, though, what does that mean for your clubhouse? Because we saw the turning point for the Mets was when Iglesias came up from Syracuse. Now, there was more to it. There was demoting Brett Beatty, giving Mark Vientos the keys to third base. There was Francisco Lindor, who had started to turn around a little bit, taking off and playing at an MVP level. A lot of things happened. But Iglesias was such a huge part of last season. And now as you think about 2025, it's sad to say it, but OMG is probably dead. Not just because Iglesias might not be back, but because you have to find a new identity. And when the Mets lost in Game 6 of the NLCS, if you remember, as they went from player to player, there was that reality that sunk in that the team was not going to be the same in 2025. Now, currently, who are the players that have left? You have Luis Severino signed with Oakland. Phil Maton does not seem like he's coming back. Neither does it seem like Jose Quintana will return. A couple pitchers that were obviously big parts of the Mets, particularly Severino and Quintana. You've replaced them. You brought in Clay Holmes. You brought in Frankie Montas. But those guys, their loss will be felt in that clubhouse for sure. You talk about the position players, JD Martinez, he's not coming back. Harrison Bader, he's not coming back. Pete Alonso, we don't know for sure he's coming back, although it does seem like it. And then you have Iglesias. You brought back Winker. You brought back Minaya. You brought back Stanek. So you are bringing back some pieces, but you got to pick and choose. Jose Iglesias, there was a point last year in the playoffs where I thought for sure he'd be back. I remember doing that show as soon as it ended. I broke down the game, and I think the next day was who's gonna come back. And I remember my gut reaction was Iglesias will be back. And then I remember thinking about it and saying, well, what about Acuna? And now, as we are less than 2 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting, it doesn't seem like a natural fit, but Iglesias does mean a lot to that team. And he has been, again, referring to the Mets as a we. I wonder if Iglesias has gotten other job opportunities where he could potentially start or have a huge role, maybe get $5 million. Who knows what's been out there for him? I don't know. A lot of veterans are still hanging out there because teams are able to just sort of wait and wait and wait, let guys be iced out to the point where they don't think they're going to get a job. And then all of a sudden you try to, hey, come win a job for us. If you win the job, you get X amount of money. And there's a good chance, or at least a decent one, that might be the unfortunate pathway for Iglesias, where he might not be guaranteed an MLB roster spot, which would be ridiculous. And it goes back to the whole story of last season. This guy that Major League Baseball had given up on, and the Mets finally gave him an opportunity, and he ran with it, and he showed how good he could be. Nick Castellanos was tongue-in-cheek on the Chris Rose rotation show, I believe it is, on Chris Rose's podcast, where he said Jose Iglesias should have been MVP last year. Now, to me, that is a Philly trolling, where you're not going to give respect to Lindor. You aren't going to give respect to Ohtani. So you say it's Iglesias. You say, what I value in a baseball player and what makes a team win. Iglesias came up and he changed everything. It is sort of poking fun at the Mets, right? And what everything about 2024 was. But we do know how valuable Iglesias was to the Mets and how much his presence changed things and moved the needle. But I think you do have to walk that tightrope where you want to bring guys back. You want to try to catch that lightning in a bottle again, but you can't just completely bring the same team back. And we saw that in 2023. We forget how good the 2022 Mets were. The 2022 Mets had a bunch of comebacks. They won 101 games. They were an awesome team, but they peaked early. And they didn't get the job done. They didn't win the division, and they got bounced early in the playoffs. So 2024 will always be remembered more fondly. For one, it was just a team that had so many gimmicks and so many things that happened, and just such a lovable underdog that those teams are always going to be remembered a little bit more. But if we really look at what the 2022 team did compared to the 2024 team, one team had more playoff success. One team played at an incredible level over the final 4 months of the season to get in, but the other team had the second most wins in franchise history to 1986. And the Mets ran back that team, but added on top of it Justin Verlander and Kodai Senga and Jose Quintana. Yeah, they didn't bring back. Actually, no, what I was saying. I was about to say they didn't bring back Scherzer. Oh, yeah, no, they had Scherzer still. Jeez. They didn't bring back DeGrom. They didn't bring back Bassett. But they replaced those guys. It was Verlander instead of DeGrom. It was Quintana instead of Bassett. Or actually, it could have been Senga instead of Bassett. That team was supposed to get better, but it just didn't work. And part of that was Edwin Diaz going down. Part of that was a lot of guys didn't have great years, and it was just a bad luck season all around. I'm not saying that's going to happen with the 2025 Mets. You brought in Juan Soto, and that's going to change everything. But you do have to walk that tightrope of wanting to bring back guys that fit in that clubhouse, that work, but realizing that it is a new year. And with it being a new year, unfortunately, that might mean that a guy that was beloved, who was such a great Met, might be what his song actually could be. We'll see what Candelita has in the works. Could just be a one-hit wonder. But what a hit it was. To close out the show, I want to touch on a couple other things as it relates to the Mets' pursuit of a frontline starter. We got a report by Will Salmon about the Mets' interest on trading for Dylan Cease, and also the Padres did something that could have taken Michael King off the table. So I'm going to go through all that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets Insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets Insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, Will Salmon of The Athletic has reported that the New York Mets are fine with their rotation. They're happy with it. That they checked in on Dylan Cease, but they are not likely to make a move at this time, which basically reads as the Padres don't like whatever package started to get floated out there. They're asking for something the Mets don't want to give up, and the Mets are comfortable with their rotation as is. That is what that report is saying. Now, that can change. The Padres, they're going to try to build their team right now with Dylan Cease and Michael King in mind. But if they are struggling to fill second base, left field, if they have too many holes, if they don't have enough money to sign whoever it might be that they're looking at. They might decide, you know what? It's best if we trade Dylan Cease. It just depends. Now, why am I only saying Dylan Cease? On yesterday's show, I focused in on Cease because he is the better of the two pitchers when it comes to track record between Cease and King. Now, Dylan Cease, clear-cut rental. Michael King could be extended. So I know there's a lot of Mets fans that like King more. I pulled it a couple days ago on YouTube, and it was 51% King, 49% Cease. So pretty much right down the middle, but King did get a slight edge. Here's the thing. Michael King now probably not going to get traded. The Padres have signed Michael King to a new deal. It's technically a one-year deal with an option. That option is a mutual option. Mutual options are never picked up. But what this really was an interesting structuring of money to give the Padres more flexibility for 2025, because this is a team that is now year by year. They, I'm sure, have a hard budget that was given to them by ownership, and they're working within those confines. Now, they have a roster that's not going to lose a lot of pieces when it comes to their payroll going into next year. But there's two guys that won't be with the club for sure. And those two guys could get traded. Dylan Cease, Luis Arraez. Right now, if you're looking at the payroll for this upcoming season, that accounts to about $27 million. So they're going to try to flip those guys, get some assets that would be longer-term pieces to have a team that can compete this year as well as next year. Michael King might fit into their plans a little bit more long-term, but even better, he just helped them out this year because his one-year deal is only worth $4 million. $1 million in a signing, $1 million in salary, $3 million in a signing bonus. So it actually only cost him $4 million. Now, luxury tax hit is going to be $7.75 million. Why? Because he has a $3.75 million buyout on his mutual option. Again, mutual options are never exercised. The player is either going to have a great year and he wants to test the market, or he has a bad year and the team wants to get rid of him. It's rarely ever picked up. In this case, I could almost see a pathway where it actually got picked up if King had a, let's say he got hurt, but it wasn't Tommy John. He just had like a down year. Actually, even then, if it's not Tommy John, he's going to beat $11 million on the market. So no, I actually can't see a world where this actually doesn't end in him being a free agent because, I mean, Frankie Montas just got $34 million coming off his first year back from an injury. Last year, Severino, after pitching to ERA over 6, got, $14 million. So, yeah, I changed my stance on that. This is a one-year deal. And it's basically a one-year, $7.75 million deal. They had agreed to go to, well, they didn't agree. They had disagreed on a contract previously. The Padres filed at $7.32 million, I believe it was. And King and his representative filed at $8.8 million. They couldn't agree, so they were going to go to arbitration, where they were going to have to settle it in court. Instead, they come up with this new contract where Michael King is going to get $7.75 million. So it is somewhere in the middle between what was filed from each side. But also it gives the team some flexibility. And this probably was Michael King hearing his name in trade rumors and telling his agent, no, I want to stay. I just got a chance to start in a big league rotation for the full season for the first time, had an incredible season. I'd like to go back to that same place, do it again, and get a monster contract next year. And they got on the phone and they hammered something out that made sense, that helped the Padres out. The money's going to be the same for him ultimately. He's going to get all of his money. He's just going to get it at a later date. It's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the whole buyouts on opt-outs on Pete Alonso's potential contract, where really it just is, putting some money in a different, place where ultimately the guarantee for that year of service is going to be the same. That's why you see teams do this a lot with mutual options. The same thing was put into the contract for Elias Diaz, I noticed. Elias Diaz, the catcher for the Padres, got a contract that pays him, I think it's like $1.5 million. And then there's a $3 million buyout on like a $7 million club option. Probably not going to pick up that option. Really, it ends up just being, like $4.5 million, which would have been a better market value for Diaz. So that's just how they're doing it. They are structuring it this way because let's just say it is, $3 million on Diaz, I think there was one on the infielder. Tyler Wade? Is that who it is? Utility guy that used to be the Yankee. Yes, Tyler Wade. He has something similar where it's like $1 million buyout on a club option. And then you have this one for Michael King. So you put it all together, and that's and there's also incentives that can raise Kings to $4 million. So then he'd make $8 million for this year. So that'd be $8 million. You put the three options together. So next year you're not paying Luis Ariz. The difference in payroll, okay, you're cool. Like that's just how it works out. They're comfortable putting that money on their books for next year because it saves them money right now, which they can now reinvest. And I think the Padres are the destination for the free agent that's looking for playing time. Jose Iglesias, like that's actually a great landing spot. Why trade for Acuna when you can keep Dylan Cease and sign Jose Iglesias? OMG comes to San Diego and he gets, $4 or $5 million. Why not? Why not? And if you're Iglesias, it's a chance to go to play for a really good team, get a lot of playing time. JD Martinez makes a lot of sense for the Padres. A lot of sense. I don't even remember who their DH is, but it's not a good one. I think it's like UG Ramirez or something like that. I haven't even heard of the guy, if I'm being completely honest. Not a top prospect, a guy with like halfway decent minor league numbers. That's what Fangraphs is projecting to be their DH. So who knows? The Padres could just take the money that they just freed up, that $4 million, sign a player with it. And maybe they can get themselves to a point. Maybe they shop Ranger Suarez and clear him instead of Cease and then take that money to sign another free agent. I'm sure they are pursuing all avenues of this thing. And if they can't get the pieces they need cheap on the market and free agency, then maybe they will pursue a trade for Dylan Cease. Right now, does not seem like the Mets are getting close on a trade for Dylan Cease. I would still hope that that is something that they would revisit and maybe make that happen. But for now, it appears like the last shoe to drop for the Mets is Pete Alonso. Once they do that, they're comfortable with their rotation. They're comfortable with their bullpen. They're comfortable with their depth, you would imagine, in that infield. If they have Alonso with Acuna, with Mauricio, with Beatty, with now Madrigal and Jared Young, that they can fill that spot that could go to an Jose Iglesias. And then it's probably just more guys with invites to camp, like a Mark Hanna potentially joining, coming aboard. Brandon Drury, I talked about a couple weeks back or a week back now, as another guy that, has a potential high ceiling, coming off a horrible year, but on a minor league deal with an invite, why not? That's what the Mets are probably going to do for the rest of an offseason that we now only have 12 days left of. So we're getting closer and closer to pitchers and catchers. Until then, or until Monday, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. By Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.